Hey, what's going on, rooftop leaders? I want to tell you today 3 reasons why grinding isn't enough, particularly in a persistent crisis. And that may surprise you, coming from a former Green Beret who is a big fan of grinding. I love it. I love high performance, and I am a big fan of it. But left to its own devices, done in isolation, it's not enough. In fact, it'll take you down. And it almost took me down several years ago when I came out of the military after 23 years of service, and I found myself standing on a planet that I didn't even recognize anymore, that I call the civilian world. And I did a lot of grinding, and I was very successful. I made my way very quickly, but what I found was it was empty, and there was a cumulative cost, an unseen cost that my friend Dave Phillips, former Green Beret from Vietnam, calls snakes in the head. And it's a very real thing. It is the levels of anxiety, the levels of disconnection, the levels of disengagement that can occur, particularly in a time of crisis when all we do is grind. And this came to fruition the other day. I was talking with a very accomplished leader. This person had led through some of the hardest times of the pandemic when everything was falling apart around her. She was a rock. She was the glue. Her rigor and the way she approached her life was so emphatic and dedicated. She put everything in her rucksack and she carried it all the way through. But the other day when I was talking to her, she said, "Scott, I am so tired." And the look in her eyes was that distant look, and I recognized that look. I've seen that look in teammates of mine. I've seen that look in the mirror when I looked at myself after grinding. It's just, there's a predictable outcome to that, and it's generally not a good one. So I want to share with you today 3 reasons why just grinding to get through, particularly a persistent long-term crisis, is not necessarily a good idea. First of all, is that when you do that, you put yourself in a sympathetic state. You are in that fight, flight, or freeze mode all the time, and so your cortisol levels are jacked, your adrenaline levels are jacked. You are taking big slugs on the devil's cocktail. Now that's great when you're at this elevated state, when you are trying to get away from a snake in the bushes. But it's not great when you are trying to overcome a cash flow problem that is going to take at least 8 weeks. You see what I mean? And if you stay in that elevated state, the body is just not designed for that. It never has been. The body is designed to go to this elevated sympathetic state to fight, to flee, or to freeze, and then to drop down into a parasympathetic state of calm and connect, where the body can metabolize that energy through emotion and breath. And then it resets itself, it regulates itself. Your state is regulated. We are not designed to be in this aroused state all the time. And if you're grinding, that's exactly where you are. And remember, when I talk about the things I went through and a lot of these other special operator buddies of mine, these were some of the most high-performing people on the planet. And staying in that elevated state took them down. The body's just not designed for that. So what can you do? Well, one thing I suggest is micro recoveries. Doing micro recoveries every day at certain times of the day consistently, as if they are a sacred ritual. It could be going and taking a walk. I was just talking to Wes off camera, and he talked about how he and his wife Becca take a walk every day. That's a micro recovery. Go get a quick workout in. Do 10 burpees. Sit down in your office, turn the lights off, and do 3 lower body breaths like Dr. Belisa talks about in her book, Breathing for Warriors, where you expand your belly on the inhale, squeeze belly to spine on the exhale. 3 of those, and you can drop into a parasympathetic state oftentimes. Number 2 reason, the second reason that grinding alone isn't enough, is that technology is wearing down our focus. Nowadays, grinding really means that you're on that damn mobile device all the time. You're watching that 24-hour news cycle all the time. You're in front of that computer keyboard all the time. There's always a blue screen reflecting back at you. And what we know through recent research, neuroscience research, is that the brain is not set up for that. You have an ancient brain in a high-tech world. I have an ancient brain in a high-tech world. You know, we can establish this very complex goal-setting apparatus, but our cognitive control to fulfill on that is somewhere around a primate. And when we add all of this inundation of technology to it, it literally wears down our energy. Because remember that humans are mostly energy, and leadership is the management of energy, according to Professor James Clausen. So if we are bombarding ourselves with technology all the time, then that energy is going to drain. Goal interruption is going to occur. When goal interruption occurs regularly, you get frustrated. You go into fear-based and anger-based behavior, and then it just feeds on itself. Do you see what I mean? So even what seems like casual surfing on social media because you get sucked into their agenda, you're actually bleeding, you're hemorrhaging energy. And as a result of that, it's going to have a reciprocal effect, and you're going to start to wear down from that. So I suggest look at the triggers that cause that to happen. 24-hour news cycle, we got to cut that way back, you all. 24-hour news cycle is a pervasive goal interrupter. Social media in general is a goal interrupter, right? And so recognizing where you get sucked in, where those triggers occur, where you get in there and get caught up in the churn of conflict. Let's start identifying those and setting those aside, because that kind of goal interruption can really have an effect on your, not just your productivity, but your mental health and your resilience. And it's cumulative. You won't notice. It's insidious. If you want to see a great book on it, The Distracted Mind is a good place to start. Third, the third reason that grinding isn't enough is that grinding oftentimes in this remote work environment means isolation, right? And I'm a big believer, like when I was working on the play Last Out, or if I'm putting a performance out, or if I'm working on a speech, or if Wes is working on a new piece of music, we isolate ourselves. In special forces, before you go on a mission, you isolate yourselves. That's fine, but let's understand that isolation is a deliberate act in order to perform at a high level for a thing. Over the last year, we've had mandated isolation as the #1 mitigation tool against this pandemic. Now, history will look back on that and we'll see what happens, right? But I'm telling you that a lot of people, including Ivan Terrell himself from the Human Givens, are saying that this isolation that we've endured over the last year is going to have far-reaching effects on us for generations to come. And so if you're grinding and you're doing so in isolation for prolonged periods of time, be very, very careful of that, because it can, isolation can lead to madness. And if you don't believe me, look around our world today. Look at how people are treating each other with such contempt. Getting rid of friendships that have been around for decades, treating people horribly in public places, engaging in polarized politics that completely give away our agency and our freedom, making us virtual servants of these political amateurs. All of those things are indications of a type of trance-like state that occurs at a primal level. It's a level of madness. Fear is a primary emotion. It gives way to the secondary emotion of anger every time, and then we slip into that trance-like state. And the more isolated we are, the more susceptible we are to that. So I would say look for ways to connect, especially if you're telling yourself you're good. Be very aware of that. The other day I heard somebody say to me, I could work from home for the next 10 years. Really? Really? Because I don't think you're wired for that, man. And even if you think you are, there are check your behavior, right? Because there are probably some things going on incrementally and subtly, but they're dangerous, okay? So I'm just saying grinding's great. Grinding is good, but it does require the rocket fuel of self-care and deep human connection. I learned that lesson the hard way. I hope that you'll learn from my struggle and put it into play, because we do need your grinding. We just need you for the long haul. I'll see you on the rooftop.